the notion of bankruptcy when it comes to Donald Trump. You had spoken of it once before.
Yeah, well, I was the one who first raised this. Donald has never filed personal bankruptcy. In 1990, he avoided it because he got the New Jersey casino regulators to take his side against his bankers. And the bankers all realized that they were going to be very badly hurt unless they knuckled under. It was totally inappropriate and improper, but that's Trump's sort of magic to get other people to do his foul doing. When he had a publicly traded casino company, it went bankrupt 4 times, didn't pay lots of bills, but Donald extracted a minimum of $83 million from it. That's how much he had to disclose. He undoubtedly took more money through expenditures that were covered as business matters, like use of his plane. After that, the company went bankrupt. He was basically paid to go away. It went bankrupt under Carl Icahn twice, and then it went out of business. If Donald were to file bankruptcy, he would get an automatic stay of both the E. Jean Carroll case and the New York State fraud case. The stay is 45 days, but I'd point out that Alex Jones, the just completely crazy tinfoil hat conspiracy theorist, interdimensional beings have taken over our leaders. He's gone more than 2 years without paying the Sandy Hook folks who he owes $1.5 billion to, way more than he's worth, but he has a lot of money.
He did that by shifting money around primarily, David?
Well, we don't know exactly, but his lawyers have done a good job of delay, and knowing who Alex Jones is, he's probably in various ways moved money that a bankruptcy court could go after him for. And the families would like to get this over with. If Donald were to file bankruptcy, it would be entirely a strategic move. It will not save him from paying the judgments eventually because they're going to be upheld on appeal. There might be some peel back, the $83.3 million to E. Jean Carroll for defaming her yet again. A court might go, it's too much. Let's make it $60 million. That's not going to be material to what's happening to Donald. And so Donald's entire focus is November 5th. Either he gets back in the White House on November 5th, or it's all over. And what difference does it make at that point? Because eventually he'll go to prison.
So to summarize, the personal bankruptcy wouldn't serve him sufficiently to address his concerns at the moment.
No. Personal bankruptcy would stop all these proceedings.
Right. I thought you had mentioned March. When did you mention March 12th? I thought was
March 20th. Well, March 12th was the deadline for the E. Jean Carroll case, and he got a bond.
I see.
He didn't. It was misreported widely that he posted the bond. He had proffered the bond, and then he posted it. Inside legal nonsense.
Okay.
Now he has until Monday next week, the 25th, to put up cash or a bond or to persuade the Intermediate Court of Appeals in New York to allow him to put up less. And courts have done this from time to time. The court also can just sit on his application and do nothing. So that's a real deadline day. But the real important part of this is not so much his strategy here, delay everything, his ability to, if he does file bankruptcy, he can sell that to his true believers easily. The corrupt Marxist fascists, they made me do this. His followers will, who think he's God, they'll go along with this. But his problem is getting to November 5th. And if he files bankruptcy, my guess is lawyers will find ways to delay and argue. And unless he gets a really tough bankruptcy judge or bankruptcy trustee who the judge appoints, he'll get past November 5th. But at the end of the day, it's all going to fall apart. It's always been a house of cards, and now it's going to fall apart. And just keep this simple fact in mind, folks. Donald Trump repeatedly said in the summer of 2015, I'm worth more than $10 billion. And now he's out scrapping for $5 donations from low-income Republicans.
The other thing that we have heard is right about that. I mean, heard from listeners and viewers who wanted me to ask you, how is it that he can claim in court that he is worth all of this money? I mean, what's noted here in one email is 800 million. He has access to cash of $800 million. Apparently, he noted that under oath, and now not have the money. Isn't that some kind of perjury or adjacent legal violation?
Well, let me correct the record. It's 400 million that he said he had a year ago, not 800, 400. I didn't believe when he said it then, just like I never believed that he was even a billionaire. And, I talked to two brand name multi-billionaires who both in separate interviews told me that to pose as a billionaire to match their lifestyle, you'd need to spend about 20 million a year. Yeah, well, Donald certainly has 20 million a year to spend. I mean, remember, Donald Trump is not a wealth creator. He's not somebody who gets what you're trying to do. You got a business, you're trying to build it up, get a bigger audience, make a living, and prosper. Donald is reach in and grab the money. And when the business is collapsing, then you walk away and say, oh, the market changed, or these terrible regulators, or something like that. Now, Debbie asks here in the thing, why doesn't he sell something? Well, it's pretty hard to arrange the sale of enough things worth $500 million in a matter of days. Secondly, this is not a good time to be selling real estate because interest rates are up. If he knew this was coming for a long time, if he had sold some things earlier when interest rates were lower, he might be in a much better position today. He has existing mortgages on properties, and those are what are called cross-collateralized based on his past experience of things that were in the public record. So that, you have a credit card. If you read the fine print, those 16 pages of tiny type, you need a magnifying glass to read. Somewhere in there, it will say that if you default, that is, you fail to make timely payments on a different credit card, all your balance on that credit card can be immediately called, and they can seize your bank account to get payment. And so Donald has covenants. We know he has covenants that require him to maintain a certain net worth, to maintain a certain cash balance. And he's all tied up in these various things. And he's always been able to pull another scam and reach out somewhere. But, he's at the end of the road about this now. And assuming that the Democrats don't screw up again, and they put their effort into the 13 states that can go for Biden or for Trump in the Electoral College, where all they have to do is get people registered and then get people to the polls on voting day. At the end, things will fall apart for Trump. If the Democrats do what they often do, they, think we're so great, we don't have to explain what we're doing and we don't have to get our hands dirty. Then Donald Trump goes back to the White House. It's the end of our democracy, and he will use his presidential powers to get rid of all of these problems as best he can. He may not be able to get rid of the state problems. If he's been convicted already in the states, then he can't do anything about that. If he hasn't been tried yet, he'll get courts to say you can't try him. He's a sitting president. But keep this in mind. I was the first person to say this, and within 2 days, all sorts of law professors and practicing prosecutors were saying I was right. Nothing in our Constitution would prevent a convicted felon serving time in prison from being and serving as president of the United States. We could literally end up with Donald Trump in a military stockade somewhere. The state of New York might put him in, and he's president.
The thought is
it's crazy.
Wild. And I also want to have, maybe for our next conversation, because I want to double back to the money here in a second, a conversation with you about the other things that happen during an election and the plans as articulated by Bannon to sort of throw a monkey wrench even into the certification in various counties nationwide. Will Donald Trump ever go to jail, in your opinion? Michael is asking.
Yeah, no, I believe he will go to prison eventually. And if he's convicted in the effort to overthrow the government, the sentences there, that is the biggest criminal prosecution in the history of this country. The sentences there have been very proportionate. There are a couple of websites that track this. Well, the biggest leaders, the Proud Boys and the Oath Keepers, they each got more than 20 years. Donald's convicted in that case. He will absolutely get a sentence of more than 20 years. He turned 78 years old in June. That's a life sentence.
I wanted to have you weigh in on this apparent media storm that's emerged around the bloodbath comments that
Yeah.
Donald Trump made. And I wonder, before you comment, David, Tony, can you play? I just want, because a lot of this is about, well, it was context and context and context. I want people to actually see the entire thing. It's only about 2 minutes. Can you run it, Tony, please?
Business in our country. Think of it. Went to Mexico. China now is building a couple of massive plants where they're going to build the cars in Mexico and they think that they're going to sell those cars into the United States with no tax at the border. Let me tell you something to China. If you're listening, President Xi, and you and I are friends, but he understands the way I deal, those big monster car manufacturing plants that you're building in Mexico right now, and you think you're going to get that, you're going to not hire Americans, and you're going to sell the cars to us. No, we're going to put a 100% tariff on every single car that comes across the line, and you're not going to be able to sell those cars. If I get elected, now, if I don't get elected, it's going to be a bloodbath for the whole, that's going to be the least of it. It's going to be a bloodbath for the country. That'll be the least of it. But they're not going to sell those cars. They're building massive factories. A friend of mine, all he does is build car manufacturing plants. He's the biggest in the world. I mean, honestly, I joke about it. He can't.
Okay, that's fine. We've seen enough, but you got it there. Go ahead, David.
Well, first of all, I hope some journalists go find out who is it who builds the biggest plants in the world and see if Donald Trump knows him, because I don't think there is such a person. It's like all his friends.
No one calls out the Trump BS like David Cay Johnston does.
It's like all the friends he had who died on 9/11, not one of whose funerals he went to, and those mythical Muslims in New Jersey who were dancing in the streets. But the context of this conversation is very important, and it's been badly reported. So let me deal with the first part. Donald Trump got us to redesign NAFTA. We replaced NAFTA with the updated Can-Am-Mex agreement, or Mex-Can-Am, or however it goes, agreement that changed the tariff rules. So what Donald Trump is complaining about is his administration's decision to change the rules. And if you listen to the whole thing, he's blaming Biden. Secondly, it doesn't matter who builds the cars in Mexico. American companies build cars in Mexico. I don't know if the Germans do, but Americans certainly do. And so that doesn't matter. It's irrelevant. He would have to get Congress to go along with what he's proposing. And it isn't aimed at Mexico. And finally, here's the key thing he's proposing. Let's assume a car you buy in Mexico is $40,000. The average price of a new car now is almost $40,000. With sales tax, it is. He's going to double it to $80,000. So listen, if you think you're going to need to buy a car in the future, you better go buy one now if you think Trump's going to the White House and he can pull that off, because you're going to pay $80,000 for another car. Because domestic manufacturers, they're going to raise their prices. A tariff is a tax on consumers. China doesn't pay anything. Mexico doesn't pay anything. It's paid entirely by consumers, and it allows domestic manufacturers to raise their price. Economic theory says to $1 below what the tariff cost of an imported car is. So American company sells their car for $79,999, and they'll do fine. They decide to sell it for $78,000. They're going to make this unbelievable profit off a car they were going to sell for less than $40,000. And that's Donald Trump. He wants to pick your pocket because he doesn't know what he's talking about. Now, the other part of this is the bloodbath comment. If Donald Trump really didn't mean to suggest violence, as he now maintains, why does he use violent phraseology? This is a dog whistle to those people who want to commit violence. The problem he's got with trying to stoke violence, we've got 1,000 people already who've been indicted. Most of them have been convicted and sent to prison, and a lot of them are going to sit there for years. Some of them that were relatively minor invaders of the Capitol are done. But how many people, knowing that the government is seriously going to go after people who try to overthrow our government, are going to say, yeah, I'm going to go ruin my life. I'm going to follow Donald Trump. It doesn't matter. I'm going to lose my career, my house, my family. Doesn't matter. Donald's more important. I want to go to prison for Donald. There's some people out there who will do that, but there are not many of them.
It's interesting that you say this, because maybe it does dovetail with something I wanted to, make an agenda item at some point with you, and maybe we can visit it just briefly. There was a piece in Rolling Stone that I thought was interesting, and it was about essentially the the plan for chaos in certain counties, in swing states,
Yeah.
where you could create enough intimidation. It's a Bannon-esque plan, but it's been articulated and it's out there, as you're aware, to create enough chaos and essentially enough pressure to prevent the certification of the vote. And again, enough counties. You don't need every county, just to create a vote that would leave both candidates, Trump and Biden, in critical states short of the numbers they'd need to pass that threshold and get the Electoral College votes to become president. So with neither candidate having the Electoral College votes required to ascend to the presidency, it would then go to the House of Representatives, and that's a Republican House because it's one state, one vote.
Well, it may or may not be. Remember, the new Congress begins January 3rd. The certification of the president is January 6th. It is the next Congress that will certify the presidential election.
That may be the biggest comment on this, because we had Howie Klein on yesterday, was talking about the blue wave that's very possibly going to hit.
Oh, I think it's very clear that in House races, there's going to be a huge turnover to the Democrats, because you're seeing all of these Republicans who are leaving office. They don't even want to run again because they know that there's going to be a blue wave. And so there will definitely be efforts to disrupt elections. I don't know how successful it'll be. This is not new. From 1960 until early in this century, the Republican Party was under a federal court order not to intimidate voters, walk around with guns, things like that. And then they got judges to finally to lift it. And they went right back to doing this kind of stuff. And as with the Voting Rights Act that was gutted by John Glover Roberts, the Chief Justice of the United States, the controls that were in place to keep white supremacists and anti-Semites and their like neo-Nazis from people voting that they don't like, those have been lifted. And that's going to be a problem. And it's going to be very important that lots of lawyers and other people volunteer on election day to deal with these things. I noticed in the comment, one of the folks here said lower gas prices under Trump. Yeah. And you know why there were lower gas prices? Because 1 million Americans unnecessarily died during COVID because of Donald Trump. I predicted in a book I wrote in 2018, more than 2 years before the pandemic, if a pernicious virus like the one that killed Donald Trump's grandfather a century ago starts hopscotching around the planet on jetliners, Trump won't know what to do. If we had followed the medical advice and not this nonsense about taking horse dewormer and bleach and other crazy stuff that Donald did, if we'd followed the medical advice, we would have had fewer than 100,000 Americans die. And we didn't. And so, yeah, business had to slow down and stop because of how transmissible this virus was. Once it had taken out the most vulnerable population, there have been fewer deaths, but there's still lots of people dying from COVID, lots of people in hospitals and lots of people suffering long COVID who are, I have friends who are still very sick several years later, and they're not necessarily my age either. So, yeah, we can have gas prices the way they were in 2020 and 2021. We just need to kill another 1 million Americans. Think this through. By the way, from the time Trump left office until very recently, gas prices fell by $1.26 a gallon or $1.22 a gallon on average. They've gone back up a little bit. Why? Well, there's this guy named Vladimir Putin who's pushing a war, and his friends who are attacking oil tankers in the Red Sea and the Gulf of Hormuz. And so, these are the people Donald loves. MBS, Putin, dictators.
The need of Donald Trump for money, David, does perhaps lead him back to some of these people that you're talking about, or countries that you're talking about. The addition of Paul Manafort potentially to his crew.
As a fundraiser.
Yeah, exactly. As a fundraiser.
Paul Manafort was a Washington political operative. He had a nice business, of fixing things for people, going to government agencies and finding where the pressure points were and figuring out how to shape arguments to favor his clients. And one day he started realizing he could make much more money going to work for vicious dictators and warlords overseas. And just unbelievable amounts of money they paid him. And he lived this incredible lifestyle. I mean, when they finally inventoried his house in a search, he had things like a multi-$1,000 ostrich leather jacket.
Yeah,
And
he
it was
large, man.
Yeah,
he
it
lived
was
it looked like a hip hop video at his
yeah,
house.
yeah. And Manafort was in the pocket of Putin. He was paid tens of millions of dollars. We know about at least 24 million, but I don't think that's anywhere near the total, by the Russian puppet who was running the Ukrainian government and who built this palatial presidential palace with no authority. When there was the popular uprising in 2014 that threw him out, journalists who had been trained by investigative reporters and editors, which I'm a former president of, arrived, saw papers floating in this artificial lake in February in Ukraine. You can imagine how cold it is, and put out a call for two things: divers to dive into the lake and get every piece of paper they could, and truck drivers with flash freeze trailers. Well, people came and they got all these documents, and by flash freezing them, you kept the bacteria from destroying them. And there were these ledgers showing these payments to Manafort. It was Manafort who attended the meeting when the Russian emissary came to Trump Tower in the summer of 2015 and said, the Kremlin is trying to help you defeat Hillary Clinton. Now, not only should you never take a meeting like that or lie and deny about it like Don Jr. did for more than a year until the New York Times got its hands on the emails, but there's only one thing as a patriotic American that you do if you're running for office or working on a campaign, and anyone from any foreign country, even Canada or Australia, our very friendly neighbors, you pick up the phone, you call the FBI, and you say, I need to speak to someone in counterintelligence. They didn't do that. So to bring Paul Manafort back, I mean, I hope Americans have enough memory. If you want the Kremlin to, be in charge of your life or have heavy influence over it, you should really vote for Donald Trump. I mean, if you think that we should have a leadership that kills its opponents, jails them without cause, reacts like Putin did when he was asked by an American TV correspondent from NBC the other day about the death of Viktor Navalny, his leading opponent, and Putin said, unfortunate, doesn't care, meaningless, because he's just a cold-blooded killer autocrat.
Well, and obviously it's been widely reported, and you don't even need to report it, the number of meetings he's taken with autocrats, the most recent one with Orban at Mar-a-Lago. But to the Putin and Manafort connection, as you say, Manafort he's a real pipeline to money. Could that money cure Trump's debt? I mean, by the way, this speaks to, I think you did a column on this on MS, about the fact that he becomes this wild security risk. The president of the United States, he's so beholden to these oligarchs or even leaders of other nations like Russia that get him through this financial problem.
So explain this. Can we just go back for a moment to 1787? The United States government is called the Articles of Confederation, and it's failing. As Adam Smith taught, all governments must tax, and it had no power to tax. So we overthrew, through this convention, it wasn't a violent overthrow. We did it by votes. The failed First Republic and set up the Second Republic, primarily so we could tax ourselves. But the framers, when they agreed to have a president, an executive, were very concerned. They wanted to make sure he wasn't a king. They wanted to limit his term in office. And they wanted to make sure he was not influenced by money. So the president could not receive money from the state governments, nor from foreign governments. Now, Donald Trump just flouted that. He took in money left and right, millions of dollars from the states and foreign governments, as well as from the federal government at his businesses. He claims he disgorged the money, but there's no transparency about that. He disgorged some money, but I don't think it's anywhere near what was involved. And he shouldn't have been doing this in the first place. What the framers never thought about, and I've read all the papers that are available from this time because I teach this stuff, they never had any discussion about what do we do about a president of the United States who's in debt to the king in England or the czar in Russia. How would we address that? What if the queen in Spain was owed a lot of money by the president? It never occurred to them. And Now we have a president of the United States who is indebted for $92 million to a Swiss insurance company, Chubb, which operates in 54 countries. They say that they have stopped doing business in Russia because of the invasion of Ukraine. But when I wrote about them for MSNBC's website, they still had Russia up on their website, including an announcement that we've moved our office to this location, but we have the same phone numbers in Moscow. But in any event, it's a Swiss company, and we don't know what's behind the guarantee. For all we know, some Russian oligarch or MBS in Saudi Arabia said, "Hey, listen, make him this bond, and I'll put this money over here. And if Donald doesn't pay, you can take this money." We don't know who he's really beholden to. And so, we do not want to have a president of the United States beholden to anybody. I mean, Jimmy Carter sold his little 2-bit peanut warehouse that had exactly zero ability to influence the peanut market because people thought it was corrupt, that he owned a peanut warehouse. So he sold it. And he lost money, by the way, because he hadn't expected to sell it, and he had to sell it in a hurry. And if Donald has to sell properties right now, he's going to take serious haircut because it'll be fire sale prices. And if Letitia James gets a hold of it, she's going to do her best to maximize the money for the simple reason that she wants to get the state paid. But she's not going to get great prices for his properties either.
We're out of time. I maybe next time want to follow up as a practical matter how that might happen, how the state of New York might take control, padlock properties and start liquidating various Trump holdings. I mean,
6 days away.
Yeah, there you go. Love, you can find David everywhere now. I mean, virtually everywhere you look. But MSNBC is a good place to start. And of course, DCReport.org, co-founder there, and pick up one of his books. He's just prolific all the time. David, thank you. David Cay Johnston, everybody. Hi, it's Mark, and I thought that was great. Hit the notification bell. You'll know whenever there's a new video being dropped. And please subscribe to our channel to help us save the universe.